hear that too. I'm like, what is that?
All right. Thanks for being with us tonight, Carmen, and thank you for coming. Tonight we have Dr. Carmen Boulter. She's going to be giving us insight into her travels to Egypt and hopefully beyond that. I've got a number of questions that I want to ask you, Carmen, and then I hope the other folks here will also ask you some questions. So the first thing that I wanted to ask you is if you could just briefly tell us what got you curious enough to travel to Egypt so many times. Oh, hold on. Hold on. We lost sound. I don't know why. Hold on. Try again. Can you say something? No, we lost sound. Let's restart the. Yeah. Take two. Take two.
Hello?
Yeah, we can hear you now. Did you hear my question?
Yes.
Okay, go ahead.
Okay, so I started having past life memories when I was a little girl. I was 6 years old, and I was seeing images of people wearing the royal outfit from Egypt, and I really didn't know what I was looking at, and it took a while before I found a couple of books, but by the time I was 8 years old, I was reading everything I could find about Egypt and looking it up on the map and planning to go there. And at the time I was making 25 cents an hour and realized that plane tickets cost $1,400, and I decided I was going to go. So the first time I went was in 1977, and it just absolutely riveted me. Everything was familiar. There was something about it. I ended up spending 3.5 hours in the Great Pyramid with just one other person that trip way back then. And after that, I was just reading everything in sight and also realizing that a lot of the material that I was reading couldn't be right. And so I knew that I had some kind of relationship to it that was deeper. And I also knew that a lot of misinformation was out there about Egypt. So the second time I went was 94. And then I've been there 28 times in total and lived over there for 2.5 years. So, I mean, it's past life, it's cellular memory is what it is.
So maybe you can tell us a bit about the, say, high points, including discoveries or meetings, discoveries of things most interesting to you, meetings with people most interesting to you, and then also low points. I mean, this is over that expanse of all of your trips. Maybe you had some troubles or conflict. So high points and low points.
Well, there was this temple I was looking for, and it was almost like this, you're getting warm, you're getting cold, like a kid's game. And I'd come back to Canada and think, that place is out there, like I've got this memory and I haven't found it yet. And I knew definitely when I hadn't found it. And it took me 10 years before I found it. I just had this image and this feeling. And finally, I ended up in the Sphinx Temple, which is one of the most protected areas anywhere. And someone got me in there. And as soon as I got there, I kicked off my shoes without realizing that the priestesses never wore shoes in the temples. And as soon as my feet touched the stone, it started to run like a movie. And I could smell the flowers and see the candlelight and see the priestesses in their dresses, and then I looked down at the end and I went, oh, behind that wall there's a door. And I walked, and sure enough, there was a door that was covered up with a metal plate, and it was a short door, it was only 3 feet high. And I understood everything instantly, that there was a passage that went from the Sphinx Temple underneath the Grand Causeway all the way to the initiation chamber inside the second pyramid. And after 10 years of no, yes, was a definite contrast. And that became really pivotal in my research because I knew more than I should have. And so that was definitely a high point, for sure. In terms of low points, one time I came back from Egypt in a wheelchair and they thought I'd never walk again because I fell off a stallion in front of the second pyramid and went smashing down. But it also ended up being a bit of a high point in the end because I couldn't move, but I could look out the corner of my eye and see the shape of the encasement around the second pyramid and realized that the platform it was built on was bigger. And it was only because I was stuck lying there immobile for 45 minutes that I noticed. And that also was quite pivotal. But I've had everything happen to me in Egypt. Not that it's a dangerous place, just that I did things you probably shouldn't do. I was so curious about everything. I always wanted to go on the Giza Plateau after it closed. Now there's this huge wall, 14-foot wall, 20 miles long, that goes all the way around, all the way down, past the pyramids. So it's not the same environment as it was all those years when I was doing that research in and out of the passageways under the plateau, which seemed to be more interesting to me than anything.
All right. So let's get started on because I originally learned about the work that you did or have been doing by watching a series that you produced and directed and wrote called Pyramid Code. And let's start in there with, can you describe what the Band of Peace is?
Has anybody else there seen the series?
I don't think so. I've posted it a number of times. When I first saw it, and then again, and then I just recently posted it again.
You mean on YouTube?
Yeah.
The illegal part? The illegal copyright infringement part?
Is that?
Oh, right. We're in Taipei. I forgot. The Band of Peace there's 6 pyramid sites, and most people think of them, just the Great Pyramid and the auxiliary pyramids on the Giza Plateau. But there's actually a site north called Abu Rosh, and 4 sites south, which is a total of 6 sites. And Abu Rosh is completely cordoned off from the world because there's no road to go up there, and there is a village of Abu Rosh. But if you go and ask them for haram, which is pyramid in Arabic, they go, I don't know. And it's not unfinished, but like you can go inside, it's open to the air. And when I had to apply to the Ministry of Defense, the actual Minister of Defense had to sign the order for me to fly in a helicopter for the Pyramid Code. They wouldn't allow us to fly over that site because they told us that they hide their ammunition there for the army, which I thought was interesting. Not necessarily in the pyramid, but in the area. And so it's really highly restricted. So people don't get a really good understanding. But in the Pyramid Code, you'll see from up there, you can see all the other pyramids. There's 22 pyramids, and most people never see that. And so, but what I've discovered through working in Starry Night Pro, which is the entire map of the heavens, and you can look at it from many, many perspectives, is that there's a significant correlation, sky-ground correlation. Now, we know that Robert Bauval in the Orion, his book on the Orion constellation being coordinated with the Giza Plateau, started there saying that there was some kind of sky-ground relationship. But I've discovered that it goes beyond that to include other planets. And the way I discovered it was through the extragalactic grid, which means that the ancient Egyptians, way back, and pyramids are way older than we think, understood outside of our solar system and outside of our galaxy. And that actually, Sirius is at the center of what could be a binary system with our sun. And so, if you rotate back to 50,000 BC and all the way forward past 10,000 AD, this configuration with Sirius and Orion, and then Abu Sir being connected to Pleiades, and Dashur to the far south being connected to Cygnus, this configuration never comes apart. And so I haven't figured out what Saqqara is yet. And I've tried many, many different star systems, and what happens is you get it in this, it breaks apart. Like if you're running it like a movie, tens of thousands of years BC and tens of thousands of years AD, the configuration doesn't hold together if you don't have the right constellations in there. And if you look at Cygnus, it's like a bird, and the extragalactic grid goes through the tail, straight out the beak. And if you keep going, you end up at the galactic center, which is what December 21st, 2012 was all about. So the ancient Egyptians understood this. So most people who look at the pyramids, if they even get to the other sites, they look like scattering the pyramids don't look like there's any rhyme or reason to being where they are. And no one's talking about this. And so it's highly significant. But the other thing that took me a while to put together was you often see Isis, who is connected with Sirius, wearing a bird on her head. And to us, that's kind of ridiculous. Like, what's the symbolism there? Like, why would she do that? But it's like going straight around the galactic, the extragalactic grid and taking the Cygnus bird and putting it on Sirius, which is a metaphor for showing how they understood this huge cycle of time that's 26,000 years. And so it really speaks to the ancientness of the Egyptians and how much older it is and the pyramid sites are than they tell us.
So going along that same line, and earlier when you mentioned about looking at the enclosure for the pyramids, you're saying like the carved out base is much older, right? And so there are some temples and constructions that seem to be much older even than the pyramids themselves, like as if these sites had been sites for worship even before there were pyramids.
Well, I didn't say worship.
Well, I guess I don't mean worship, but sites of places for people to come together for whatever reason.
Well, I don't even know that it was for that, to tell you the truth. It seems that there's a unified ground plan, and that the actual X marks the spot where the stars would have been were designated long before the pyramids were there. And I happen to have some very strong past life memory from the distant past, and that's why when they say that the pyramids were built in 2450 BC, maybe the last restoration happened then. But that would be like looking at the building you're in right now, and the last time they painted it was 2005, and saying it was built in 2005. It doesn't have to be. That building could be 30 years old, right? Right. And so for sure work would have been done in 2450 BC. But I think the pyramids are much, much, much older, and that there were things there before.
Okay, and also you mentioned it's the sunken pyramid. That's the one that they didn't want you to fly over. Is that right? It's the sunken pyramid is the one they didn't want you to fly over? Is that
the sunken one is the one they didn't want us to fly over, yes.
Are there other constructions like that in the Nile Valley? Or is that one's unique?
No.
Can you talk about how that one is unique?
Well, it's definitely got a vortex in it. And so I forget this when I go. And you kind of have to hang on to the side as you're going down the passageway into the pyramid. And there's this spot about a third of the way down where my body actually starts to completely vibrate, because there's actually some kind of an energy field there. And so these pyramids are far more powerful than I think anybody gives them credit for, but they're also quote-unquote decommissioned. Like Valery Yuvarov in his work in a book called The Pyramids, and he's a Russian scientist. He talks about how most pyramids are dead and decommissioned, and that the Great Pyramid is not functioning the way it used to. And so he says that plus or minus 6 days from solstice and equinox, plus January 19th, are the only days that the Great Pyramid actually is running the charge like it used to. And so there's so much we don't know, but there are fragments that give us clues, which is why I think this whole idea of psychic archaeology and, you know, really pairing the cellular memory with what we find.
Okay, so now I guess there are probably lots of reasons why, say, the pyramids would not be at their, you know, highest energy points, but let's maybe talk about one of those reasons and talk about the migration of the Nile. Can you talk about how the Nile has migrated and where it is now in relation to where the pyramids are and how far it's moved, that kind of thing, over time?
Right now the Nile is 8 miles from the nose of the Sphinx. And there's some percolating up of water from the water table right at the foot of the Sphinx, and you'll see sandbags around. And some people think that they're excavating down there, but they can't because they've covered it with cement. And so that's not the reason. But all along the entirety of the Band of Peace, you can see the evidence of where the old riverbed would have been, simply because of the shape of the sand and the land, that it would have been eroded. So for a river to migrate 8 miles, that's got to take tens of thousands of years. Because a river will migrate a few inches, if that, in 10 years, right? And so it really has moved. And again, most people don't think of it that way. Antoine Guégal talks about the Giza Plateau having been an island, but I don't see any evidence of that. I think on the front of it, you can see that there used to be water, but the back of it, there's nothing. So, you know, we have to be matching with evidence. So I think you can get a hypothesis about what really happened from cellular memory, but then you got to go down to the ground and look and see that it matches up. So when the pyramids were fully functional, the passageways underneath would fill up with water when the Nile flooded. And it would create a different context on a yearly cycle for what was done and how the energy fields worked. But there were also casing stones on the pyramids, and the Islamists don't think that the pyramids are special at all. And if they had been able to take them down, they would have. But we don't even have the technology to take them down, never mind put them up. And so they use the plateau and the entire Band of Peace as an open quarry. And you'll find a lot of the mosques and the monuments, even the aqueduct in Cairo, are built out of stones that came off the pyramids. And there are 9,000 mosques, 6,000 mosques. 6,000 mosques in Cairo. So that just shows, you know, the shift in terms of culture over the years. And so it's just not what it was, but there's enough there to give us this trigger and for the past life memories to line up. So, you know, we can say that we've lost the evidence of the way it used to be, but we didn't lose it all.
Okay, and next I want to ask you, can you describe the significance of sites like Nabta Playa, Abu Balas, the Cave of the Swimmers, and what relation they have to either the migration of the Nile or to ancient trade routes?
Okay, so these sites are further south along the Nile, all the way down at the southern border of where Sudan and Libya and Egypt meet. They call that the corner. And Gilt Kabir is actually on the Sudanese side, and Nabta Playa is on the Egyptian side. And these are places that would flood regularly, but specific times. And when it was the cattle cults, and they were, you know, walking around and mobile, they would have to find water. And so they would come to these sites, and very much like even Stonehenge, where every 8 years or so, there'd be a calling for people to walk all the way there and do rituals and gatherings and whatnot, because Stonehenge is also on a water table. And the Osirian, right beside Abydos, is also on a water table. So all of this had to do with the migration and the cattle cults and that sort of thing. However, I think that they correspond to the world flood. Now, if you've seen The English Patient and The Cave of the Swimmers, that's Gilt Kabir. And Gilt Kabir, Kabir in Arabic is big, and Gilt is plateau. So what you find there geologically is a flat piece of land that's the size of Switzerland. And so if you can imagine a world flood, and the pyramids unmistakably have survived more than one world flood, and they could because of the way they're built, and the whole planet being flooded, there would have been some people who were swimming around who didn't die, not very many, because I think that mostly it was an extinction event, and they could have swam to this high plateau and then started over. So what you find at Gilt Kabir and Nabta Playa is the marking with stone circles, calendrical stone circles, that are measuring the alignments to Sirius, the Pleiades, Orion, and Cygnus. Now, if right now there was a world flood and the grid went down, we would have to go outside. We wouldn't be able to survive in the buildings. We would have to start over. Nothing would work. It doesn't mean we're not technological. It means our electrical grid went down and we'd have to start over. Now, we're in a different condition than they were in because they were much closer to nature. But I think that it was very sophisticated people, and the whole world fell apart, and they started over with the most significant thing for them, which was watching the stars. And so these calendrical circles still exist in the middle of the desert, in literally the middle of nowhere. And it took us 3 days to get in there, going across the open desert, going through 17 police checkpoints to get in there. I mean, it was really quite high adventure. And the evidence is there, but there's also underground things that have been buried, and 3 levels. And so it was obviously built by man and then buried. But we're discovering other sites around the world that protected themselves from the world flood and buried things. And so one of them is in Turkey, Göbekli Tepe, which is obviously a matriarchal site. And they buried it in sand before the world flood, and it dates to 13,000 years ago. So bit by bit, we're piecing this together. But the problem with academia is that archaeology doesn't speak to linguistics, doesn't speak to climatology, doesn't speak to anthropology in a very meaningful way, so that we're not meant to figure this out. There's been this whole thing of dividing different disciplines at universities and whatnot, and so this has really disadvantaged us, and that's the compartmentalization is really a patriarchal way of being and thinking. And so we have to look from a completely different perspective in order to put this back together. And we're really at a loss when it comes to this because of the way universities work.
Okay, so going from far out in the desert, I want to go back to the Band of Peace, and specifically, I can't remember the name of the temple. Just like I can't remember the name of the sunken pyramid, I call it the sunken pyramid. But the Temple of Man. What is the Temple of Man? What is its name?
It's the Temple of Luxor.
Oh, okay.
In the city of Luxor.
How much time did you spend in the temple of Luxor? And maybe you can talk about the 3 most interesting things in that temple, or the 5 most interesting things, or...
Well, it's one of the things that is significant to me is it's right beside the Nile. And so the cruise ships dock right across the street. And it's literally in the city, which means it's a newer temple. If you look at temples like Abydos and Dendera, they're miles away from the Nile, more than 8 miles. And if you get up on the roof, you can see that the Nile is way, 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 way far in the distance. And we can see quite far. You can see the pyramids from over 20 miles away. And so first of all, it's a newer temple. And I think it was built in the 18th dynasty by Amenhotep III. But then come along and Ramses said, oh, that's me. And he tried to erase everything that was Amenhotep III's and say it was his. So there's lots of layers of how Egypt deteriorated from the dynastic period, which started in 3113 BC, which corresponds to the beginning of the Mayan calendar. And so we have to really look in terms of time frames, and there's various clues. Now, in terms of my cellular memory, the first time I went there in 94, I just about convulsed when I overheard an Egyptian guide talking about Ramses. I just about passed out like somebody had punched me in the stomach. And I'm like, why am I having such a reaction here? Because the voice in my head was saying, this is not Ramses. This is not the 22nd dynasty. There's something wrong with what they're saying. Now, Schwaller de Lubitz and John Anthony West brought this work forward. Schwaller de Lubitz talked about the cavities of the human body corresponding to the hypostyle halls inside the Temple of Man. And it could be the Temple of Woman, because Karnak and Luxor are separated by 3 kilometers, and there's 2,000 sphinxes that join them between the two. And they're only being excavated now. Like every time you go to Egypt, there's more and more of these Avenue of the Sphinxes that are excavated. But the point is that the temples are so precise that people have some kind of an experience while they're in them because it's resonating with the shape of the human body, the cavities. And if you walk in through the feet, metaphorically, and if you keep going, the Holy of Holies, the altar of the Holy of Holies, which would be in the head, is actually the pineal gland. And so The pineal gland is shaped like an acorn, and it's also calcified by fluoride. Pardon me. And so our spiritual connection is metaphorically represented in the temples. Now, there are other temples built later, notably by Ramses II, down in Abu Simbel, which are all a tribute to his ego, those huge statues. And if you go inside, nothing's precise. The hieroglyphs, the frescoes, they're not precise. And again, I get this horrible feeling when I'm in there because it's not feeding the right place. It's distorted. And so really and truly, there is a physical effect and a spiritual effect by standing in these temples, which means they understood sacred geometry. They understood so much more than we understand. And so we look at them like they're, childish and infantile, but that's just because we haven't reached the sophistication and we don't build things caring about people's energy fields. Like if that was so, there'd be no squares anywhere in buildings. Everything would be round and circular, and the feng shui would work a different way. And so in order to understand ancient Egypt, we really have to go back far enough before the patriarchal influence. And so I think that what they were doing is they were also remembering, the geniuses that built these temples were remembering a time that was far more sophisticated, which we've lost from these world floods and from differences in the Yuga cycles. So now we're in the densest part of the Iron Age, and when these things were built and fashioned was in the Golden Age. And these are separated by 13,000 years. So these cycles are something that gives us clues as to how to understand the ancients.
Okay, so maybe you can talk about the work that you're doing now and your planned travels to other megalithic sites. I'm very curious about, you said that you're going to Göbekli Tepe and I mean, I've only just sort of, I've read the Wikipedia page, or I've watched a couple documentaries or something like that, but I don't know anyone who's been there. I don't know. I don't have any plans to go there anytime soon. So maybe you can talk about what's taking you there and what you're excited about seeing, that kind of thing.
Well, just like Abu Rosh is hard to find, Göbekli Tepe is a couple of miles from the Iraqi border, so it's certainly not a big tourist site. But it does speak to the idea of times before those country lines were drawn in. And as astronauts will tell you, as soon as you see the Earth from space, you realize there's no little different colored marks on the different countries. It's just a unified whole. So if you go back far enough, you'll see that a lot of the megalithic structures are matriarchally based, and they're round structures, and they're also connected to the stars. So Göbekli Tepe was completely covered in sand. And a farmer came along and tung hit the top of one of the pillars, and they started excavating. But it's only something like 4% excavated. And it's just an absolutely enormous site. And it's filled with these pillars that are quite sophisticated and quite modern looking. And embedded over these pillars are different shapes of animals, very strange beings. But you find that also in Egyptian cosmology, where they've got reptilian beings and snake beings, and they really honored nature. And so they don't think of the different animals as creepy the way we do. And so there's something very astronomical, matriarchal, and connected to nature that is entirely curious. And again, the way archaeology works, it's a really slow process, and it's a destructive process. And so once archaeology is done, things are taken away, and so they have to go really methodically. But in some ways, that stops us from really seeing what's there. Now, the new project is called the New Atlantis, and it's spawned out of Russia. And I'll bet you don't know that they've been building new pyramids in Russia, right in the center of the landmass, which is similar to Giza being exactly in the center of the landmass of Africa and the world landmass. And if you go north, you'll see that Tomsk, Russia, is in the center of the landmass of Russia itself. And so the New Atlantis project, the plan is to build 9 pyramids. So the one in the center is already complete. and then 4 around that, and 4 concentric circles around that, with the waterways the way Plato described Atlantis. And it's Valery Uvaroff that had the genius of figuring out how to reinterpret and recommission the pyramid energy. And so he's asked me to make a documentary series of 4 episodes on this process, but how these pyramids are actually affecting school children. There's 450,000 school children that are in the area, and this one pyramid was completed last year, and starting in spring, they're going to build 4 more on the outer circle, and next year they hope to build the other 4. But this plan is brand new in terms of having a model for an empowered humanity, which are my words, but to change, transform education, transportation, agriculture, and all of the different things that we need to run a healthy society that have gone so far wrong with the insistence on oil and the political corruption and, you know, profit being the highest value instead of consciousness. And so really humanity is ready for sanity, and we've got a lot of things that are damaging us, and I think the education system's failed us all. And so there's real problems, and this project is about restoring models that actually work for people instead of working for the richest people on the planet. And so it's in the making, and I've been filming interviews with scientists, but it's really on the cutting edge. There's no doubt about that.
Well, I've got a few more questions, but I want to open it up to other questions from other people. But just one thing on the last thing that you were saying. About a year ago, I watched a number of YouTube videos of a Russian group of scientists there from different fields, and it's all in Russian, so I had a hard time understanding it, but I tried to watch it anyway. And they went to lots of sites, like they went to some sites in Egypt, and they went to some sites in Peru, and I'm curious now, why do you think the Russians are more open to doing things that maybe people in the United States would consider to be fantasy or something like that? It seems like, no, I'm not saying everyone in the United States or Canada believes that things that are slightly super normal are just strange, right? In the United States or Canada, you might get labeled a conspiracy theorist or just out there, and it seems like in Russia, now I could be totally wrong, I have a Russian friend, I should ask him, but it seems like they have no problem saying, okay, let's investigate aliens, or let's investigate pyramids. There's just no hang-ups about it. Do you notice that kind of thing?
Oh yes. Now this is a very profound question. And I went to Russia last year in July, and it was the White Nights Festival. And I thought, oh yeah, White Nights, like the movie. And I just rewatched that movie. You know the movie with Mikhail Baryshnikov and Gregory Hines? You're nodding. Okay, there's an awful lot of propaganda that's gone on in the States. And the Russian scientists, I'm willing to guess who they were that you're seeing these measurements. And probably Dr. Konstantin Korkov, who invented some of these machines that are measuring consciousness fields. And he said, you know, very frankly, when I discovered a new site in February last year in Egypt, and we had to go in with a hot air balloon, and he was with us, and he said the United States, they're doing an experiment of what happens to people if you have the worst water, the worst food, the worst medical service, and the worst education, and what happens to people down the road. And look what's happening, is that people are just, you know, focused on what Paris Hilton's dogs are wearing and what's on American Idol, instead of really waking up. Now, the rest of the world actually has disclosed about UFOs. Russia, Argentina, Mexico, Canada, even through Paul Hellyer, all over the world, the UFO, even in the UK, the UFO files have come out. It's only the United States that's saying, no, that doesn't exist. Now, we have been used to being lied to, and Hollywood is run by Zionists, and they're the conspiracy, and anybody who's trying to crack the case or who understands things about what's really going on get persecuted. So the criminals don't go to jail for doing these huge banking crimes, but somebody who's a whistleblower will. And so the lid is on, and they really don't want people putting two and two together, except we have internet now. And so in Russia, Valery Yuvarov himself, who built this pyramid, he was the consultant ambassador for UFO research to the government. He's personal friends with Putin. And concurrent to his project on the pyramid, the new Atlantis, he built something called the Crystal Spa, which takes the pyramid energy, and I've been there in St. Petersburg, and walking even through the back door, from the threshold of the parking lot into the building, it felt like standing inside the Great Pyramid. And I've got a lot of experience being inside the pyramid and how it feels in there. And he actually took the pyramid technology that he built into this big pyramid in Tomsk and put it into the walls of this Crystal Spa. And the purpose of this spa, it's a health club with all this new technology for healing. But it's for the politicians to get clear so that when they help the people, they're really helping them with the highest level of consciousness possible. You ever heard of that in the States? Hello? You know, it's really quite astounding. And the reason that the $5 million was spent on the pyramid in Tomsk was it was a produce company dead set against anything GMO, genetically modified, and they wanted a warehouse to energize food before they put it on the trucks to transport it to people so the food would be healthier when it got there. They outlawed microwaves. No one's allowed to have a microwave in Russia. Okay, and so this pyramid energy actually does charge food in a positive way, whereas microwave energy destroys the structure of water. You know, it destroys the structure of the food. And so, being in Russia, it was fascinating to me that people are well-educated, not in their egos, beautifully, fashionably dressed, highly educated, the architecture is beautiful, the arts are in place, and all this is just absolutely incredible. And I was so very impressed. I was asked to speak at a conference and give the results of a study I had done in the Great Pyramid with a number of people and measure the effect of the fields, the consciousness fields in people before, inside the Great Pyramid, and after. And there were 47 different scientists, and they were so advanced. It was incredible. And everything was dual language in Russian and in English, so I was able to keep track of it all. And then I did a week of training on these machines, because I have one of them. And when I came back, I was so filled with this admiration for the Russian culture and what they're doing and how they're out of debt and, you know, free education and all these things that work for people. And I was met with people's response, oh, no, you just didn't see the KGB. They're hiding around the corner and they're out to get you. And you didn't see it because I know a friend who knows somebody who went to Russia, and it was all, and I realized when I watched White Knights, how the Hollywood puts propaganda in to demonize certain people and demonize certain ideas and scare everybody. And if you don't know better, you think it's true. And this couldn't be more true about Egypt, because all of those news stories about what's going on in Egypt, they're just not true. It is absolutely false, wag the dog propaganda. So the Russians are truly making an inquiry into what's going on. They truly care about their people. And this, I think this is in real high contrast to what's going on in the States.